If you like what I do, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, join the Patreon page, and purchase something from one of my online stores. Every little bit helps. Thank you. Ulysses S. Grant hoped that the attack on New Market Heights would force Robert E. Lee to send more of his troops north of the Appomattox and James Rivers to defend Richmond. If this happened, Grant was going to use part of two corps, Gouverneur K. Warren's 5th Corps and John Parke's 9th Corps. Parke took command of the 9th Corps when Ambrose Burnside left the Army of the Potomac following the Battle of the Crater. Lee kept up the activity in his front as he began to move more troops north to the threatened position. He hoped this deception would keep the Union troops around Petersburg stationary. If it was up to the Army of the Potomac commander George Meade, it probably would have. One historian explains, the Virginian strategy did not succeed, however, because the ultimate decision on challenging it did not rest with Meade. The Major General, something of a perfectionist of the old school, could fight hard and well for grand goals when the conditions were right, but preferred not to fight at all when objectives seemed minor or conditions not all that might be desired. Grant, to be sure, neither advocated blundering blindly into battle nor fighting for no greater reason than just to kill some Southerners, yet he was not an all-or-nothing man either, and was willing to strive for even penultimate objectives in hopes that later, if not sooner, they would provide the opening to more complete success. He responded to his subordinate's report in that light. The Union stationed about 24,000 men on its far left flank, ready to strike wherever Meade and Grant told them. On September 30th, at about 9 a.m., the blue columns began marching to the west. Over the course of about 9 or 10 days, Confederate infantry had worked tirelessly to construct earthworks to guard their extreme right flank. The entrenchments and forts were in various states of construction, some nearly complete and some barely could be considered fortifications. The strike at New Market Heights drained valuable manpower from the Petersburg front, with a lot of infantry making its way to help defend Richmond. All that stood in Warren's way was a brigade of cavalry, numbering about 1,000 men. Warren and the other corps moved at a glacial pace, some of it caused by Warren's cautiousness. Hours ticked by as the blue troops marched and halted along the road. When the Confederate artillerymen began to lob shells at the Federals, Warren halted his men and began to deploy for battle. He wasn't able to, or didn't discern how weak the Confederate force in his front was, and took 2 more hours to deploy his troops. As historian Richard Summers explained about Warren, his personal hesitancy to precipitate battle probably continues partially to explain the delay. Another key factor in slowing the attack was the terrain, which was even more difficult west of the church than east of it. The dense woods north of the Poplar Spring Road gave way to a small clearing 3/8 of a mile west of the Vaughan Road. Warren worked through not marish terrain to deploy Charles Griffin's division to confront the rebel horsemen, and threw out Romaine Ayres's division along the Vaughan Road, facing north to protect his right flank. This unjammed the bottleneck and allowed Parke to bring up his divisions. Parke placed his 2 divisions in support of Griffin's division, who were engaging with the skirmishers of the enemy. Debate still surrounds the next moments of the battle. Some historians believe Griffin's division got anxious under the shelling of Confederate artillery, and some believe Warren ordered the movement, but either way, Griffin's 3 brigades rushed forward toward the Confederate works. The bluecoats, streaming through or around the obstructions, now jumped into the moat. Some, burdened down with their knapsacks, had difficulty getting out. Many more, though, soon clambered up the exterior slope and planted their flags on the ramparts. The blue tide surged over the Confederate fortifications, driving the rebels away from their position, and began capturing enemy troops and artillery pieces. One of the captured artillery pieces was one that the Confederates captured at the Second Battle of Reams Station on August 25th. Colonel James Gwynn, one of Griffin's brigade commanders, rode up the ramparts on his horse, but the animal lost its footing and the horse fell on Gwynn, injuring him badly. Ellis Spear of the 20th Maine took over the brigade. Following the successful attack, John Curtin's brigade extended the line to the north, and Simon Griffin's brigade advanced past the 5th Corps. The other 9th Corps division extended the Federal line to the southwest, with John Hartranft foreman on the 5th Corps' left, and Samuel Harriman refusing the line to the south to guard the flank. Napoleon McLaughlin's brigade went into reserve near the Peebles House. Most of the Union brigades stopped at the rebel works, but a few regiments from Spear's and Griffin's brigades advanced north and northwest, where they encountered heavy opposition from enemy skirmishers. Most likely, Warren's hesitancy to move forward came from what happened a few weeks prior at Globe Tavern, when an unexpected attack nearly cut him off from the rest of the Union Army. His actions make clear, however, that worry over being counterattacked outweighed his commitment to renewing the advance. Park's conduct throughout the afternoon, moreover, reveals him even more hesitant than the New Yorker in his unaccustomed role of corps commander. These personal shortcomings of the two responsible generals, plus their worry about strong Confederate forces reported to have been in the area earlier in the week, completely paralyzed their strike force for a crucial hour following the breakthrough at Fort Archer. By giving rise to these fears in the Yankee leaders, those phantom forces from outdated Union intelligence reports did a far better job than Joel Griffin's shaky troops of retarding the Federal advance and guarding Lee's supply lines in early afternoon. Another major obstacle preventing the two generals from pushing on to the objective, the Boydton Plank Road, was that they were co-equal in this operation, with no designated commander. If one or the other had been directed to command the entire operation, there may have been more of a willingness to press on after the first initial success. The over 20,000 Union soldiers stayed mostly inactive following the capture of the rebel works. The strike force, made up of units from the 5th and 9th Corps from the Army of the Potomac, carried the Confederate works, blocking the way to the Boydton Plank Road. Gouverneur K. Warren and his 5th Corps were stalled out, but the 9th Corps was ready to proceed with the advance. The Army's commander, George Meade, remained at Globe Tavern, monitoring the situation. Meade's hesitancy wasn't unwarranted. He feared that Confederate cavalry could attack the rear of the army. The beefsteak raid a few weeks before proved that the rebel horsemen could infiltrate and operate behind Union lines. In the mid-afternoon, the 9th Corps advanced toward the Boydton Plank Road and the next set of partially constructed earthworks put together by the Confederates. Park went about deploying his brigades across the Jones and Pegram farms, with Simon Griffin's brigade of Robert Potter's division taking an advanced position on the Church Road. Henry Heath and Cadmus Wilcox's divisions of A.P. Hill's corps were now approaching the field, with Wilcox in the lead. James Lane and Samuel McGowan's brigades advanced on either side of the Church Road and slammed into Griffin's brigade, driving them back toward the Pegram farm. One Union soldier remembered the attack vividly. I had never before seen a full rebel line of battle in the open. In one of our previous battles, they had either been behind their entrenchments or partially covered by the timber. But there was no attempt at covering themselves here, and my heart went rapidly downward as I saw their strength and knowing how thin and light was the line formed by the 2nd Brigade. I have heard of Ma Parlington trying to sweep back the Atlantic Ocean with her mob. We were engaged in similar work. Behind Wilcox was 2 brigades from Henry Heath's division, 1 brigade under James Archer, who had just returned to the field after his imprisonment following his capture at the Battle of Gettysburg, and 1 brigade under William McRae. Heath would take command of all the Confederate forces on the field. When that happened, Archer was given command of Heath's 2 brigades, and William Macomb commanded Archer's brigade. The Confederates pressed southward, bypassing John Curtin's front line, but driving the 2nd line rearward. Curtin was with the 1st line, and quickly realized the predicament they were in. To make matters worse, McRae's brigade came down beside their left flank on their way to drive the Federals south. Curtin ordered his men to wheel around and hit McRae's men in the left flank, which drove 2 of the Confederate regiments away from their position. Curtin knew that he couldn't retreat because of the rebel brigade that had just swept by his right flank, and they could block him from reaching the main Union line. He took his men a little west in an effort to escape capture, but 2 regiments of Wade Hampton's cavalry in the entrenchments advanced on them and forced the majority of those 3 regiments to surrender, sending them to Petersburg as prisoners of war. The brigades of Lane and McRae continued their southward push, driving all the Federal units before them. They ran into the brigade of John Hartranft, who was stubborn and didn't want to yield any ground to the approaching rebels, but his flanks were being overwhelmed, and he too fell back, with many of his men being captured. There was nothing to do but fall back. Immediately on our left was a tangled swamp, and having been run out to the left farther than any other regiment, In falling back, I found myself and my little regiment cut off from the rest by the swamp. Here we all came near being captured. The Confederates drove the Bluecoats all the way to the Pegram farm, where a stand was made. Heath and Wilcox's men continued to press them, but their own attack had become disorganized in the successful assault. Plus, Charles Griffin's division made it to the field and threatened the left flank of Archer's brigade. We had now driven them near a mile in confusion and rout, and there was considerable disorder in our ranks. The impulse of the first charge had spent itself. We had no supports. Both flanks were uncovered. Night was approaching, and therefore it was impossible to make a fresh charge and carry the position of the Pegram house, which was a strong one, defended by overwhelming numbers of fresh troops. Night brought an end to the furious attacks on the Jones and Pegram farms. The Union forces formed a defensive line running from Globe Tavern to the Pegram farm. Meanwhile, the Confederates pulled back to the Jones farm. When Meade informed Grant of the battle, Grant responded, "Hold on to what you have and be ready to advance. We must be greatly superior to the enemy in numbers on one flank or the other, and by working around each end, we will find where the enemy's weak point is." The attack by Lieutenant General A.P. Hill's two divisions on the Jones and Pegram farms on September 30th halted two Union corps, the 5th Corps under Gouverneur K. Warren and the 9th Corps under John G. Parke. Hill probably remembered the devastating attacks that his corps launched at Globe Tavern a few weeks before, and wanted to recreate that attack. In the assault, he hoped to separate the Union force from its permanent entrenchments near Globe Tavern and defeat it in detail. Henry Heath's division would launch the flank attack along Squirrel Level Road, while Cadmus Wilcox would attack the Union force in its front to hold it in place. Through the night of the 30th and into the early morning hours of October 1st, the Union soldiers dug in. Union Army Commander George Meade took the General-in-Chief's advice. Ulysses S. Grant stressed to Meade that with them attacking both flanks of Robert E. Lee's army, that one or the other was seriously weak and to press toward the Boydton Plank Road, and that would threaten Lee's supply lines. Meade gave similar orders to Warren and Parke. It was a miserably rainy night as troops, both blue and gray, either marched to their battle positions or attempted to create fortifications out of the soggy ground. A soldier from Massachusetts recalled, "The work was very difficult, as the constant rain gave the freshly turned earth the consistency of mud. The aspect of the men as they painfully prodded the moist ground with sticky shovels or crouched around smoky sputtering fires was lugubrious in the extreme, and their feelings corresponded with their looks." Meade's orders to Warren and Parke to launch a reconnaissance in preparation for a move to the Boydton Plank Road resulted in both men displaying a lack of enthusiasm. Parke and Warren wanted to secure their new position before they launched any kind of movement. While Warren and Parke improved their works, Hill moved Heath's division to the Squirrel Level Road. His men were ready for their attack between 6:45 and 7 a.m. Wilcox was to wait until he heard the guns of Heath's brigade before he launched his own attack to ensure that the Federals wouldn't shift troops from his front to Heath's. By 8 a.m., all of Hill's troops were ready for the attack. William McRae and James Archer's brigades moved against the Federals on the Squirrel Level Road, but instead of encountering a soft flank, he found an entrenched enemy. Heath pulled his men back and brought up a couple of batteries of artillery to soften up the fortified foe. The Union brought up their own artillery, and a 30-minute duel ensued as both sides flung iron at one another. The guns went silent about 9 a.m., with Heath wanting McRae to probe the Union line and see if the artillery had weakened the enemy. McRae's regiment used no caution and charged the position, but they immediately came under a heavy barrage of well-placed volleys. The North Carolinians couldn't take any more and ran back to safety. Heath, frustrated by the lack of obedience by McRae's brigade, called up Joseph Davis's brigade and Archer's to perform another probe of the Union line. The two brigades uncooperatively moved forward. Part of Archer's command simply refused to make the attack at all, while some of Davis's men fled during the attack. Heath called off the attack and moved his men across the Squirrel Level Road out of harm's way. Wilcox was decidedly more successful, but not to any great degree. He ordered his men against the awaiting Federals utilizing his sharpshooters to pave a way for his main line to round up a good number of Federals too slow to escape the Gray Wave. The attacks halted there, with only skirmishing continuing throughout the day. Warren informed Meade of the attacks and declined to make any attacks of his own. He told the Army commander that he and Parke would entrench further and guard the ground that had been captured. Worried about the troops on the left, Meade dispatched a division under Gershom Mott from the 2nd Corps to help bolster Warren and Parke's position. After A.P. Hill's morning attack on October 1st, the Confederates didn't launch another offensive. However, a cavalry engagement did erupt on the Vaughan Road. As the day moved into the afternoon and evening, neither side moved a great deal. In the night, Hill withdrew his forces. He may have given up hope at reversing the Yankee incursions, but he most likely felt that the best way to prevent the Union from capturing the Boydton Plank Road and the nearby railroad was to pull back to the fortifications that protected that vital transportation link. Plus, if Hill moved back to those fortifications, his men would be able to respond to an order from Robert E. Lee to move them across the Appomattox River to New Market Heights, the location that Benjamin Butler's Army of the James was attacking. This movement of troops reduced the Confederates in Gouverneur K. Warren and John Parke's front from 14,000 to about 4,300, consisting of 2 infantry brigades and some cavalry. The Union plan for October 2nd was to proceed to the Boydton Plank Road with an early morning march. However, Ninth Corps Commander Parke would set out that morning with the intention solely of checking the strength of the enemy. Warren was simply to help guard Parke's right flank. Gershom Mott's division of the 2nd Corps arrived to take part in the excursion to the road. Mott's directive was to find the Confederate right flank. Mott's division moved out at 7 a.m. Mott had been in the Union Army since the summer of 1861. Before the war, he held various jobs and even rose to the rank of 2nd lieutenant during the Mexican-American War, that being his only pre-war military experience. Mott was seriously wounded at 2nd Manassas and was promoted to brigadier general, taking over a brigade in the 3rd Corps of the Army of the Potomac. Following the reorganization of the Army in 1864, Mott's troops were placed in the 2nd Corps, where Mott now commanded a division. Morale crashed, being moved to a different corps, knowing that their old corps had been disbanded and its units divided up. Subsequently, the division met disaster during the Overland Campaign, forcing Hancock to divide up the division and give the brigades to other divisions. When David Birney took command of the 10th Corps in the Army of the James, Mott took command of Birney's 2nd Corps Division. On this October morning, Mott's division moved at a glacial pace, covering only 2 miles in 5 hours. Parke didn't set out until 8 a.m. It was into the afternoon before the 2 commands were in position. By that time, a lot had changed. One, Army of the Potomac Commander George Meade informed General-in-Chief Ulysses S. Grant that no resistance had been met and he feared that the Confederates had all retreated to their earthworks. Meade advised not to attack the earthworks at this time. Grant agreed. He told Meade to hold what ground he could, and those orders had been passed on to Parke and Mott. 2. A.P. Hill felt it safe for him to send 2 brigades to bolster the fortifications guarding the Boydton Plank Road. Amidst the movement of troops that day, Meade was near the front with a group of officers, most of them from the 5th Corps. As they talked, a Confederate artillery shell clipped the tail of Meade's chief of staff and grazed the army commander's leg before hitting the ground and failing to explode. The witnesses remarked that had the shell exploded, the commanding general and many officers important to the war effort would have either been killed or at the very least seriously wounded. Mott's division and Parke's corps were ready to launch a probe against the Confederate position. Samuel Harriman's brigade would assist Byron Pierce's brigade from Mott's division. At around 3 p.m., Pierce stepped off, coming under a destructive fire, gaining no ground, and having no support. Harriman didn't move from his position, arguing that he hadn't received an order to move. Pierce brought his men back to safety, and the Battle of Peebles Farm came to a close. By the next day, the Union Army had thrown up entrenchments near the Pegram House and were a little bit closer to the Confederate lifelines running into Petersburg. However, it came at a cost. The Union lost around 3,000 men, while the Confederates about 1,300. A Pennsylvania soldier remembered the grim scenes following the action at Peebles Farm. Oh, what a sight! The dead and wounded had all been removed, but the arms and legs that had been amputated still lay there on a pile, some with boots and shoes still on, parts of pants and underwear, and arms with white hands sticking out of tattered shirt sleeves. You get sick looking at all the blood and dirt, and could almost feel the pain that was suffered there. It was the most disgusting scene I ever saw, and I hope it would be the last. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, join the Patreon page, and purchase something from one of my online stores. Every little bit helps. Thank you.